What is the software supply chain and why should I care? What open source vulnerabilities are hiding in my environment? How can I find them? Find out on today's Tanium Tech Talk. Welcome to Tanium Tech Talks. I'm your host, Ashley McGlone, and perhaps recently you've heard in the headlines something about OpenSSL v3 or Log4j or Spring Beans. In your career of IT firefighting, you've probably heard those come up and you've probably been involved with it. So today, what we're going to talk about is how Tanium has released the capability of granular visibility into this open source area of risk, and what are the embedded components that are in the applications that we install in our environment every day that are kind of hidden under the covers. Tanium's now giving you a new level of visibility. So for this conversation today, I'm welcoming back to the show Roland Diaz. He was on a previous show. He's one of our asset SMEs. Roland, welcome back, and introduce yourself for those who haven't met you on the previous show.
Well, for those that haven't met me, I'm Roland Diaz. I've been here with Tanium for about 6 years now. I am the Director of Technical Product Management for our Asset and Discovery Inventory solution. And I was one of the people involved in the conceptualization and development of what we now call SBOM.
SBOM, like we invented it, right? So
I don't know if we invented it, but
yeah, right. So tell us, SBOM. We hear this acronym floating around in IT headlines a lot right now. What does it stand for, and why should we care?
It's basically software bill of materials. And the reason why we should care is in today's world, developers tend to use all sorts of open source libraries, local libraries. And, as we all heard in the early days of Struts, finding that stuff was really difficult. And then Log4j came around. And the big challenge with Log4j was that Log4j wasn't just a jar file that existed on your endpoints. We all thought that it was, but it really wasn't. Log4j core was embedded sometimes within 5 or 6 libraries, even 20 libraries deep within an application. And as an IT resource, finding that was near impossible. So what ended up happening was we needed to build a way of finding that. Our PM likes to make it analogous to getting a list of ingredients for cookies without having the package. And what SBOM really does is imagine taking a cookie, dropping it into some magic machine that's going to sit down and pull apart the list of ingredients and let you know, hey, there's peanuts in there. And if you got a peanut allergy, you probably don't want to do that. Well, we kind of do the same thing with these DLL files and these jar files. We list out all of the hidden libraries that are inside of it so that when Log4j came out, we were able to very quickly pivot and let people in the industry know, yes, you have this in your environment. Are you vulnerable or not? That we can't tell you when we first came out with this. We are working on that within our integration within our comply module to tie that back to CV information. But right now, what we're giving you is the ability to turn to your CIO and say, hey, yeah, we have this in our environment. We probably want to take a look at it.
Even the headlines as well, that the US and the UK have I shouldn't say regulations, maybe that's a stronger word, but there's some cybersecurity guidance coming out of government leadership saying you need to get a handle on this. And I know particularly the White House order said that software companies need to provide a software bill of materials, a list of the ingredients. Like you said, I love the cookie analogy. That's great. So here's a list of the ingredients of the open source components in this software that's available.
I think it was Executive Order 14028 or something like that. And, even Gartner is saying that by 2026, everyone is going to be required to have it. I think really the other big differentiator between what we do here at Tanium versus what you're going to get from your software vendor is they use what's called build-time bill of materials. So when a developer is putting together an application, they need to supply that for you. The problem is, again, going back to Log4j or some of the other exploits, is that a lot of software vendors never had bill of materials available for you. Or even worse, when you remove the product from your endpoint, you don't know that you cleaned up all of the little bits that make up that application that's out there. So what we did here with our SBOM product is we actually do what's called runtime. Using Tanium, the platform Tanium, using our index product, we're looking for certain ecosystems, whether it's Java files, Go binaries, native binaries, it really doesn't make a difference. We catalog it. Once we find those, we use our software manager product that's inside of Asset to then rip that thing apart and give you that list of ingredients to sit down and say, here's everything that we found. So now when you need to do that investigation, you don't have to wait days or weeks for a vendor to get back to you to say, here's the bill of materials. You can go right into the Tanium console and within a few seconds get that answer and know whether you're exposed or not.
So my son is a developer, and I'm not throwing shade at developers, but there's this stereotype, right, of some open source person in their basement writing this component that gets put up on GitHub. It gets popular, and so now people are including it in their code. So this is the problem we're trying to solve, is when you've got all these different open source components that are buried within an application. Some people say that software development these days, that you can just string together a bunch of these components and make your app, and that happens on some level, right? And then you've got the other end of the spectrum of development where it's like, no, we're going to write this by hand, every line of it. So, but it's really common today to borrow these components. So that's the problem we're trying to solve for the enterprise, is helping you find those invisible components where normally you say app X is installed on my machine, but you can't normally see what's under the covers of that. And that's what we're delivering. So yeah, this is a peeling back the onion of visibility even to a new level.
Yeah. And it also gives you the ability, if you have senior staff that are pulling in open source applications to do their job, where you may not necessarily know it's there, this is going to expose that for you. I think there's a little bit of an other untold story where we in the asset world have always been asked by customers to identify ear, war, and jar files. And we never really had the ability to do that. Our file evidence kind of brought some of that data back. And what's eventually going to end up happening with software bill of materials is we're going to start tying those library files back to processed applications. So things like, IBM Sane Time or some other Java-based applications.
So for those who are not in the know, could you define ear, war, jar? What are those? That I think that'll help our audience understand what really goes into this.
So in the world of Java, the typical extension is you run a Java executable that usually runs a jar file. When you have multiple jars that need to be joined together, an ear file or a war file basically is a compilation of multiple jars buried within that, kind of like a compressed file that makes up the core of the application. So from a what's on my machine perspective, I may know that there's a server.jar file there, but I don't realize that that's actually, Apache Tomcat. And that's really how we were able to find it. From an asset inventory perspective, it's easy for me to identify Internet Explorer because it has an uninstall registry. It's got all these things that are available to me. But what it doesn't have for me is the existence of that jar file that's out there, or that ear file. So that's really what we're doing to do that.
And from what you said earlier, there could be nested layers of that to discover.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. Well, I think we've laid out the case pretty well here. Why don't you show us what we've built to address this?
Okay. All right. So within asset, I'm going to kind of drill here into the asset module. What we've done with asset 119 and going forward is we've now introduced index CX and our ability to control it. So what I would do is for SBOM setup, I would come in here and create a profile. I already have some predefined ones here, but I'll just show you what that looks like. I'll do create profile. Within here, I can call it whatever I want.
So for those who are new to profiles in asset, could you explain what is a profile all up?
So what the profile is going to do for us is it's going to drop a setup down to our index CX, which is a client extension that runs on the endpoints. And what it's going to do is it's going to tell both the SBOM interface as well as index what ecosystems we want to look for or what file types. And then it's going to catalog that, because what I don't want to do is I don't want to crawl the file system every time we're looking for one of these libraries. So what we're going to do ahead of time is tell our indexing product, hey, go ahead and find these ecosystems, catalog it, let me know they exist on disk. And then I'm going to have a stub process within our software manager client extension that's going to run, again, independent of Tanium, that's going to go ahead and do the analysis or pull apart the ingredients of that cookie for you. The other thing you can do within here is you can select your targeted computer group. So if you have certain systems that you don't want indexed for whatever reason, maybe they're highly sensitive machines like trading systems, or they could be manufacturing equipment. Maybe you don't necessarily want this happening. So in here, I can select the computer groups that I want to target. And then down here, I would come in and I would choose the different file types. So in here, we can collect all of the Java libraries. So here you'll see the jar, the par, the sar, the war, the ear files, etc. We can also take a look at JavaScript, so any Node or NPM libraries, any Python code that are on machines, Ruby, PHP. We also will take a look at all Go binaries, and we can also take a look at all native binaries. And what I mean by that are DLLs on Windows machines, SO files on Linux-based machines, and anything where its magic number is defined as an executable. And what we're going to do then is index all of that. We can set the frequency. So right now, by default, Tanium will index the entire file system once a week. So we're not doing too much overhead on your machines. And we're telling it to distribute over all of your endpoints over a 24-hour period of time. In here, I can put in certain exclusions. So if there's certain things you never want indexed and you never want eligible for SBOM, you can define that in here. And then the same thing, you can go in with directory exclusions and say, don't include these directories. By default, we usually leave out the Tanium client.
All right. So if I wrap this up, I'm going to try to think through what an admin's experiencing here. So, so they see the headline for the next vulnerability.
Right.
It says it's in this software component, which is a Go compiled binary, for example.
Right.
Normally, I'm not going to just turn on and scan all these things because that's going to put more load on my endpoints that I don't want. And it, even though Tanium throttles that, it's still a lot. So I should say it could be a lot. So what we want to do then is just, once we know what we're looking for, surgically just enable this profile for only the machines that are in scope, for only the file types, so that we can be very respectful of the environment then.
Well, and the other thing you need to understand is, like with any of our CXs, there's the initial load. So when I first drop this down on the endpoint, it's going to take a little bit of time. But once we start building those catalogs, it's not like I need to go back and build them over and over and over again. So I usually do recommend to be a little bit proactive and start building these catalogs early on, so that when the next exploit comes out, you don't have to push the profile out for a specific library, wait 2 or 3 or 4 days. Get ahead of the curve. You know, get this stuff out there, start building these things. Where I think it becomes more important is really when we start getting over into reporting and understanding when that thing comes out. Do I have it in my environment? I've already done the legwork. I've already done the prerequisites of building those libraries based on what I have in my environment. I mean, to your point, if I don't have any Go binaries, why enable it? You know, if I'm really only concerned about Java-based applications, only do Java. You need to do what you're mostly concerned about. So here in reports, I can come in real quickly and I can look for my general list of all packages. So in here, this is what we're collecting and coming back from all the endpoints. So I can see every single package that's in there. There's over 9,000 in this environment. So if I want to look for like log4j that we talked about before, I can do a quick search. And maybe I want to focus on core because that was what was in the news recently. And in here, I can see all the different versions of log4j core that I have. I can see the vendor that distributed, its version number, I get its CPE string, and what it's basically Java, what its library type is. So in here, I can see it's a Java library.
All right, before you leave that, I got a question on the CPE string.
Sure.
This looks like I can tell there's some kind of data encoded here. Is this supposed to be human readable? Is this supposed to be ingested somewhere else? What is the CPE string?
So if you've ever dealt with vulnerabilities, every vulnerability will come out with a CPE string. It is basically its version number. It's the origin of the software. So you're going to get the name of the application, the vendor, the name of the library within it. This is used a lot by FedRAMP. It's used a lot in the federal space to be able to track software. So think of it like a unique fingerprint for a software package version combination, kind of like it's GUID is, I think, probably the best way to think of it. And there's a whole bunch of, stuff behind it. I'm no CPE string expert by any means. It's very easily it's very easily searchable. But typically when you get any vert alert that comes in from a vendor or comes in from the government, the first thing they're going to give you is a CPE string. And generally that's where you want to start your search. So I would want to come in here and say, hey, let me find it. What I'm doing here, because I already broken out the CPE string into its individual components, I can then do my searches for just that particular part of that string.
Nice.
All right, so let's say we've talked about OpenSSL before. So in here, I can see all the different versions of OpenSSL, all the different manufacturers or vendors. And if I sort by version, I can see that, I only got version 3.0. This might be a vulnerable version of it because we know that anything 3.0.5 or higher. So that might be something of concern that I want to take a look at. So let's say something new comes out, right? And I'm just going to use HTTP client as an example. I can come in real quickly and I can search my environment. I can see that I got 3 different versions of HTTP client in my environment. So now maybe I want to start doing an investigation on that. And I'll pivot in a minute over to Interact to kind of show you how we do that. But the other thing I wanted to focus in on really is our executive reports. So if I search for SBOM, I can come in and take a look at my log4j report. And now what this is going to do is this is not only going to show me the vendor, the name, the version, the CPE string, and the type, but it's also going to give me something that's even more important, which is where is this located? If this is an embedded file, I can come over here and see exactly where log4j is buried within the environment. If it's
That's
buried,
good, because that was my next question was, okay, how do I know what dropped this on the endpoint? What app is using this component?
Yep. Well, and not only we show you, we also show you where it's located. So if I drill down into this and get the machine, I can show you the path to exactly where this is on your file system. The other thing that we can do now using our hashing technology is I can grab the SHA-256 hash of that library and search for that. So if someone happened to go out and rename the library to something else, renaming the library isn't going to change its hash. It's going to still make it searchable for me. And then
that, when it comes to hash searching, that's where Tanium shines as well. That's been, core Tanium capability for years, right?
Yep. And that goes into the vulnerability hunting perspective of it. So even if, like I said, even if somebody renamed something or moved it or changed it, we're going to give you the ability to search for that hash and find it anywhere on the disk. So from an investigative front within Interact, I want to come in and I want to search for that HTTP client, but I want to do the detailed search. I want to know where it is in my environment, where is it located. So I can come in here and do an SBOM. And I want to get the detailed information. So all I have to do is type in HTTP client. This does use regex. So if you wanted to do a more wildcarded search, you can do that. I'll ask the question in my environment, and this will go out to all the machines right now, real time, and find where this is located on my environment for me. So again, here I can see I have HTTP client from Apache. I can see its CPE string. And now without having to create an executive report within Asset, I can actually see all the detailed information about it. So now if I wanted to do a search by hash, I could do that. We have a couple of different different sensors available right now. So I'll show you those. So within here, I can get information by hash. So if I want to do that hash searching, it's possible. I can do just generalized searches. So basically this returns the same information, but limited to a particular library that you're looking for. The other thing that I kind of built here within Interact, and it's something that you as an administrator have the ability to do, is I can come in and build some real-time executive reports as well. So if I come down here into my dashboards and I do BOM, I can pull up my SBOM reports. And what I've added in here are all of the common ones that we knew that were in the wild. So I have Log4j Core, OpenSSL, Spring Beans, and Struts. And what this is doing right now versus the executive reports that I did in Asset is this is going out real time, querying the endpoints, pulling the information back and making it available to you. So again, here's all my OpenSSLs. And, I pretty much already know we don't have any struts. So here's all my Spring Beans and the different versions that are out there. And back up here is my Log4j Core.
Yeah, I remember several years ago, actually, you and I came in about 5.5 years ago here at Tanium, and it wasn't too long after that when struts really hit. And I can remember one of my TAM peers writing some custom TAM content to go find the struts and kind of peel open those files. And now, several years later, we actually have this built in. This is fantastic.
Right. Well, and again, it's like everything else we do here at Tanium. It's about speed to data, speed to understanding what you have available, what's in your environment. As I kind of touched on earlier, and people may ask, like, this is great, but what's next for SBOM? Because this is really, we had our MVP release, which was version 1. It was packages and content. This is version 2, where we've removed the packages. We removed the need to have an action trigger this, and which means that it's running independent of the machine being connected to Tanium. The next thing that's coming out within Asset is we're going to start building the basically click on a library and create an executive report with a couple of clicks instead of having to actually import all the data and do all of that. But really the big thing that customers have been asking us for is, I get a lot of, hey, Roland, this is really great information, but, really what I'm concerned about is my vulnerabilities. Am I vulnerable? Because just because I have Log4j on my endpoint, I already know that there needs to be several other indicators or several other factors that exist on the endpoint that show that I'm vulnerable, and I want to see that CV information. And right now our comply team is working on doing that. So we've done the legwork of doing the find. We found it, we have the CPE string for you, we're telling you where it's located. Now comply doesn't need to do the same. It doesn't need to pull every jar file apart and figure out if the library is attached to it or not. We've done that legwork for them. Now they can sit down and take the vulnerability information and compare that against what we have on the endpoint. So now they can sit down and say, okay, yeah, you have Log4j, but you have the other files, you have the other bits that make that exploitable. And then now you can take action on that, like we do with everything else in Tanium. You can pivot over quickly and patch and remediate the patch, or maybe deploy a software package via deploy to remediate that action, or maybe just remove it from the endpoint. So it's pretty exciting times.
No, that's fantastic. So that new comply capability should be out there soon. So then we can, so like you said, peel back the onion, and then we see all the pieces. How do we know which pieces, or where do we know where the peanuts are, right? Where the things that I'm going to be allergic to, so to speak, in the cookie, right? So comply would give you that reporting on top of this. So this is the data, and then comply is going to interpret it to say, here's what's actually vulnerable. Very nice.
Yeah.
So that's coming. Nice.
That's coming very shortly. It's a very large focus of us because of the executive order, because of what we know is coming down the line. And frankly, there's not really a lot of other companies out there that are doing the runtime, library hunting. I mean, it's if it isn't build time, it's a problem, and we needed to react quickly. Our customers are loving this. I mean, a lot of them wish they had this in the Log4j days, because I know for me, it was a lot of sleepless nights 2 Christmases ago, over trying to do all that Log4j hunting. And now it's a couple of clicks and you have the information in front of you in a few seconds.
So you mentioned customer feedback. I'm curious to know, this has been out already. We waited to put this on the show until it got some legs. So I'm curious to see or hear what have you heard from customers who've actually tried this in their environment?
Again, for them, the biggest thing is they found things that they never knew that they had. I mean, they went through the whole Log4j exercise, and then with our SBOM, they were able to now find that where it was buried, where they had no idea it was buried before, and they were able to take the additional steps to remediate it. I mean, again, I think it's a huge time-saving crunch, and that's really the biggest thing that they appreciated. I mean, I remember one vendor, and I won't give their name out, but one of our customers sat down and said, like, I really wish we've had this, because you have no idea how many hours, how many weeks, how many sleepless nights we had when it was like a rapid fire. You had Log4j, then you had Commons text, and you had Apache, then you had OpenSSL, and Lord knows what's going to come next. And the fact that we're able to sit down and give them the ability in a few minutes to know whether they have that next bad thing. Our Vert team recently came to me with something new that came out, and we said, hey, it was some new vulnerability that was out. I'm like, hey, just give me the CPE string. We were able to search our environment here at Tanium real quickly and realize in a few minutes that we don't have it. So we're not exposed. We don't have to worry about it. And that's really the big thing that we offer our customers, is that it's just that speed to understanding whether or not you have that bad thing in your environment.
Yeah, I've heard stories that, when an event like this, I know you mentioned executive dashboards a few times. And the reason that's important is because when you're a member of the supply chain, okay, there's two supply chains, right? There's kind of a traditional product supply chain of components going in, physical components going into other physical components on the assembly line, but this is the software supply chain.
Yes.
So I have to understand where these software components are on any machine in the enterprise. And so that's critical. And so I know for us, when Log4j came out, as a software company, people were asking us, do you have this in your product? And we needed to be able to tell them yes or no. And as well as scanning our own environment to see if we had any software that we were consuming as a company that was vulnerable. So with this, there's all that reporting and churn of trying to figure out, okay, is this us? Where is it? Scope it, all that. So we can really condense that process. Here, you're telling me it's just a few clicks now instead of all those hours that, you're right, countless teams just spent countless hours.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I think the other important thing is, like, we learned through this exercise, because we do have a lot of developers here at Tanium, just the sheer scope and size of it would have been near impossible. But again, because we cataloged, we took those pre-active steps, we were able to not only see everything that was on that developer's machine, but be able to identify real quickly whether or not they had that library, because no software bill of materials from a vendor is going to help me do that. And how many companies have their own custom development teams? I mean, every organization I've ever worked for, and most of our stuff was either built in Java or a lot of open source. And again, you don't know what's out there in the world until you start scanning it.
Well, Roland, thanks for this tour of Tanium's SBOM capability. As we wrap up, what do customers need to know about how to get this?
So contact Tanium, obviously, get in touch with your DSA if you're an existing customer, talk to your TAM, get a demo of SBOM. SBOM is an add-on to Asset, so you do need to own Asset first, because Asset comes with Index. And from start to finish setup, it takes about a day at most. If you don't have Asset, for us to install it, once we distribute the Index CX libraries, if it's not already in your environment through another module you have at Tanium, then we're going to start cataloging all that data. So it's a pretty quick setup and turnaround. That it's really about all it's going to take. It's very quick to get on your endpoint and get into a POC.
Well, Roland, thanks for bringing this to us today. And for those of you who would like more information, down in the show notes below, I've got some resources linked for you, docs and such, that will give you some more documentation that you can take back for your own internal conversations as you're considering whether this would be helpful for you. So there you have it, folks. More goodness from the Tanium Innovation Engine, helping you find those buried components, right? Finding the peanuts in the cookies. I love that analogy, right? Finding the ingredients in the software that could come from the software supply chain that may be at risk in your environment. So now you can be ready for what's next, right? Ready for whatever that next vulnerability is in the software supply chain. So Roland, again, thank you for giving us this tour today. And for everyone else out there, Go-Tanium.